All right, welcome back. So we've spent a good amount of time with Husserl's epoche, right? This idea of bracketing the world to get to the things themselves. But what happens when that thing is a work of art? How do we really encounter a painting or a sculpture? Today we're diving into Dufrenne's really fascinating answer, one that's going to challenge how we think about objects, perception, and even reality itself.
So let's start with this. Just think for a second about the world around you. It is just full of objects. But our intentionality towards them, how we direct our consciousness, it's not all the same, is it? Dufrenne wants us to really pay attention to that profound shift that happens in our perception as we move from looking at a tool to a stone to a work of art. Because it's right there, in that little shift, that his entire philosophy of aesthetics begins.
So what Dufrenne is getting at is that our default setting, our natural attitude, the way we just move through the world identifying things for their usefulness, it just doesn't work when we're standing in front of a painting. It's completely inadequate. To really experience art, he says, we have to perform a kind of, an aesthetic epoche. We have to shift our attention, adopt a whole new way of looking to let the work show itself to us on its own terms.
Okay, so let's get into the absolute heart of this. This is Dufresne's most crucial distinction. And honestly, it's the key that unlocks everything else in his system. He asks us to make a clean break between two things that we usually lump together. So on one side, you have the work of art. That's the physical thing. The canvas, the paint, the block of marble. It exists out there in the world, a kind of dormant potential. But then, on the other side, you have the aesthetic object. Now, this is not the physical thing itself. It's the phenomenon that shows up when that work is perceived in this special aesthetic way. It's the potential of the work finally being actualized in our experience.
Now, here's the really important part. The aesthetic object isn't just something you're making up in your head, some subjective fantasy you're projecting onto the canvas. Dufrenne is a good phenomenologist. He insists this thing is real, but it's a reality that only exists in the encounter. It's a co-constituted reality born in that space between your consciousness and the physical work. Dufrenne actually calls this a metamorphosis, and it's a contingent event. I mean, the physical artwork is necessary, of course, but it's not enough. It actually needs us, the perceiver, to join with it, to engage it in a very specific way for its aesthetic reality to even be born. You could almost say the artwork is waiting for us to complete it.
So how does this metamorphosis actually happen? What's the medium of this encounter? Well, this brings us to another one of Dufresne's key ideas, and it can be a little slippery, what he calls le sensible, or the sensuous. Think of it this way. In a work of art, the raw materials, the paint, the stone, the sound, they get transformed, they get exalted. The sensuous is what that matter becomes when we look at it aesthetically. A patch of red is no longer just a property of a thing. It becomes an event, a presence, all on its own. The matter itself is suddenly alive with expressive power. And just look at the difference in our intention here. Normally, our brain is wired to proceed through sensory qualities to get to what they mean. We see redness and we think apple or stop sign. But in aesthetic perception, we don't pass through it, we dwell in it. That deep, vibrating crimson in a Rothko painting is the meaning. It's not a sign pointing to anything else.
Dufrenne gives us this brilliant example. A mechanic hears the noise of an engine, and for her, it's a sign of how well it's functioning or not. But the composer, Arthur Honegger, he hears that same noise and finds the raw material for a symphony. For the mechanic, the sound points somewhere else. For the composer, the sound is the destination.
Okay, so now that we have these two big ideas on the table, the aesthetic object and the sensuous, we can start to draw some lines in the sand. We can map out the unique territory that art occupies by seeing how it's different from all the other objects in our world. First, let's take an object of use, like a hammer. Its whole purpose, its finality, is external to it, to drive a nail. Its shape is determined by that function. A sculpture, on the other hand, has an internal finality. Its reason for being is completely contained within itself, simply to be perceived. It's not expressing a technical project, it's expressing a whole subjective world. Now let's compare it to a natural object, say a random stone you find on the beach. That stone is the result of what Dufrenne poetically calls the anarchy of chance. It's wild, it's non-human. But a sculpted stone, even one that looks rough and accidental, it has the seal of a human intention on it. An order, a design, has been imposed that reveals something profoundly human. So, this is a great way to keep it all straight. You can see the distinct place each of these holds. The object of use is made to be used. The natural object simply exists. But the aesthetic object, well, it's unique. It's a human creation whose entire purpose is to be perceived, and its meaning is totally self-contained within that act of perception.
So what's the ultimate point of all this? Why should we bother engaging in this very specific, unique mode of perception? Well, according to Dufrenne, it's to get access to something pretty extraordinary. This is the final step, and it might be the most profound part of Dufresne's whole analysis. The aesthetic object does more than just represent or signify things in our shared world. Through that exalted, sensuous material, it actually expresses and constitutes a world of its own, a whole, coherent, self-contained reality with its own atmosphere, its own logic. So, through the aesthetic object, the artist's personal, subjective world is literally opened up to us, and when we perceive it correctly, we are invited to step inside. It's a communication, not of data or information, but of a lived experience. Dufresne's example of a Rodin sculpture is just perfect here. A bronze hand is functionally useless in our world, right? It can't do anything. But in the world it creates, it expresses absolute power, or tenderness, or misery. It stops being a real hand so that it can become a true one, where those qualities have this absolute, self-contained meaning. Its meaning is completely immanent. This is what Dufrenne means when he borrows that term from Sartre and calls it a quasi for itself. Now, it's not a conscious being, obviously, but it has that same quality of being totally self-contained. It doesn't point to something outside itself like a road sign. All of its references are internal, within the world that it alone reveals.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. Let's reflect on what this really demanding philosophy means for us, for the audience, for students of art and experience.
Remember, the central radical takeaway from all this is that the aesthetic object isn't just a passive thing sitting there waiting for us. It's an event. Sure, without the physical work of art, all you have is fantasy. But without our specific, attentive, aesthetic perception, all you have is a dormant object.
Dufrenne puts it this starkly: the two depend on each other completely. One cannot exist without the other. And that is a really radical idea, because it means that we are co-creators in realizing art's meaning. We are helping to bring it into being.
So the crucial implication here is that experiencing art is an activity. It's a verb. It's something we do. It's a practice, a perceptual discipline that we have to cultivate. It requires our active, willing participation to unlock the world that's just sleeping there inside the work.
So I'll just leave you with this, to think about on your next trip to a gallery or a concert. If Dufrenne is right, if the very reality of the aesthetic object depends on us to show up, what does that say about our responsibility to the artwork? Are we just passive consumers? Or are we active participants who have a duty to help bring a world into being? Something to think about. Thank you.